The name's Nat, and every Thursday we do inspirational, I like to say, webinars on neurodiversity, looking at new subjects, deep diving, taking complex subjects and breaking them down into bite-sized chunks. Today, we are doing ADD in women. To be honest with you, it's probably more ADHD in gender, but I'm going to be focusing on women in particular because that seems to be the area which there is less research on, but the research that is really interesting, really fascinating. All right, today we are focusing on ADHD, ADD, any kind of Ds and H's and A's that you can think. We're going to be looking at the different diagnosis, the different labels, how it affects people different. We're going to be looking from a biological perspective. We're going to be looking from an environmental perspective. We're hopefully going to have a good kind of three-dimensional view today. Oh, update, Emma, you'll like this. I've finished my master's. I've done my essay. We're done. I've got a little bit of admin to do, which is still an 80-page document, but I've done the hard stuff. The things that I'm getting marks for, done, dusted. Honestly, a weight off my shoulders. It was the hardest document I ever had to write. Ugh, it had to be absolutely perfect, word by word. Not my strong suit. All right, thanks everyone. I've done tooting my horn enough. Here's our team. Today you got myself in the chat. You've got Jessie, our newest team member, Jessie, send me a photo and I'll put your lovely face on here, unless you don't want me to. We also got Daniela and Blake, our American interns, which I realize we've only got 1 week left of them. They're leaving the UK. So my heart breaks too, but it's been great having you all. I've uploaded a bonus webinar, which is inclusive design in the IT sector. Very niche, but do check it out. This is one that we do for corporate partners, but I thought it was good, so I edited it and April helped edit a bit of it and we put it on online. So do check it out. ADD in women. There's a few things we need to break down here. Difference between women and females. Basically, the difference is one is biological, one is social. Women is a social construct which people may adopt, where you could be biologically female or non-biologically female. I'll be honest, the gender area isn't my area of expertise. If I'm a bit clunky with it, apologies, I'm doing my best. It is interesting because we are going to be looking at it from a societal perspective in terms of how people treat women, but also from a biological perspective on how the female brain is different to the male brain. Now, for those of you who aren't aware, ADD, attention deficit disorder, is a defunct label for ADHD. There is still use and merit in it. So I will be breaking it down why I purposely chose to use that today. ADHD stands for Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. Let's break it down even further. So attention is focusing on something. So if you're very attentive, you're able to focus and pinpoint. If you have a deficit, this is when there is a lack of something, a shortage, when something isn't performing to peak ability. You have a lack of attention. Essentially, the AD is a lack of attention. Then we've got the H. That is hyperactivity. This doesn't mean that you have to be flapping about and running around in circles. It can also mean that your mind is really active. Your mind is flapping around and running around in circles. Excessive activity, both physical and mental. And the last one, disorder. Disorder simply means dis, as in different, and order, ordinary, different from the ordinary. These are official conditions that disrupt functions. So you may have bad attention or struggle with hyperactivity, but not a condition. When we put these all together, we get ADHD. Do you know, I'm glad I made it literally yesterday. I've been loving the creativity lately. Today, we are crossing that H out, we're cutting it off, and we're forgetting about it. Not because women cannot have hyperactivity, they absolutely can. They just tend to be more likely to demonstrate the internal hyperactivity, where the mind is running on that kind of hamster wheel. It doesn't tend to demonstrate as frequently outwards. Again, I'm being careful with my language here because people can. So again, even if everyone with ADHD has ADHD, but not everyone shows every characteristic. Attention deficit hyperactive disorder is a neurodevelopmental condition. All that means is you're born with it. Yes, it's with you for whole life. It's part of your genes, your DNA. It's who you are. Officially, we are going to be slicing and dicing it into 3 categories. We've got the inattentive ADHD, where the mind it's either super focused on something or super disinterested on something. This is type of ADHD which is more common in women than males. You have the hyperactivity, impulsive ADHD, which is the kind of classic ADHD which we think of when we think of a boy jumping around in circles. But when you become older, that hyperactivity does change to like restlessness. That kind of what it seems to look like a bit more. Then you have the combined ADHD when you've got a little bit of both. These three categories or subcategories, they are used to help people understand what ADHD is. This is the official term that's on the DSM, the Diagnostical Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders, the ICD, which is like the UK one. But there is some people who think there may be more, or there are different ways of categorizing it, which I want to have just a few moments to look at. This is one academic's opinion, an interesting opinion, but one opinion. Amen, who had like a whole website and has made like loads of money in the US around it, says there are 7 types of ADHD. Again, this is not officially recognized. However, a growing number of people are buying into this. You've got your classic ADHD. This is your kind of hyperactive ADHD. Your inattentive ADHD, so far so good. We're familiar with these. The over-focused. These are people who will put all their eggs in one basket, say, this is exactly what I'm interested in, essentially burn out. Then you've got temporal lobe ADHD. These is when you do a scan of the brain and the majority of the activation, which you will associate with ADHD, is happening in the kind of temporal lobe there. The next one is limbic, in the limbic area of the brain. And this is more related to emotions. So if you're someone who struggles with mood swings, your ADHD has a more emotional reaction, then you've got, let's go with the anxious ADHD, those who are more passive, introverted, who get overwhelmed and overstimulated. And then you have the ring of fire, which apparently is the most extreme version of ADHD, where it's accumulation of everything. You let me know what you think of this model. Is it actually helpful to break ADHD down, or is it just confusing matters? A lot of Amen's research was done using brain scans. So this is maybe a more scientific way of doing it, but honestly, the jury is far from deciding where to go. Oh, Jim says too much overlap to be useful. Yep, you can see how might not be. There are different varieties, but anyway, this was just a little bit of a distraction because I was researching it the other day and I found it interesting. Yet, Amanda, you say it's heading into ASD. Some people think actually there's less categories than 3 that we have acknowledged. Actually, ADHD and autism are the same thing. ADHD is just part of the spectrum. Really interesting. Here are some terms which may or may not be new to some of you. Because when we think of ADHD, we typically think of the inattentive ADHD, the hyperactivity ADHD, and the impulsive ADHD. Those are the 3 key defining areas of ADHD, but there are much more than meets the eye. Those are, the most defining characteristics, but there is more. It's an iceberg. So ADHD also have a high likelihood of co-occurring. You are also likely to have low self-esteem. You potentially have sleep issues, sensory processing challenges, attention difficulties, emotional regulations. Here are some terms which are more related to women and females than their male counterparts. So we've got masking. This is when you hide your ADHD traits. So it's not obvious you have ADHD. We'll come back to that later. Then we've got underreporting. This is when you just don't bother talking about it, or you don't really have that conversation, so your ways of learning goes amiss. Then you've got internalization. This is turning your symptoms inward. So rather than expressing themselves in terms of like physical hyperactivity, it's more likely to be an internal thing. Again, less likely to be acknowledged. Emotional deregulation. This is difficult to manage emotions, getting overwhelmed very easy. Perfectionism. They know they have flaws, but they don't want to admit it. So what they'll do is they'll double down and go extra harder into an area. That sounds great, but again, burnout is a real thing. We've got social camouflage, and this is when we try to blend into society so nobody knows that we might be a little bit different to the average person. Overcompensating, extra effort burnout, anxiety-driven diligence, over-detailing from fear. So do any of you go into more information than you should do? A lot of people with ADHD are known to talk really fast and to talk in excessive detail, and it's overcompensating. It might mean that you're in a situation which you don't feel comfortable. Rather than going inwards into your shell, you'll go completely into the situation and go over the top. Oh, honestly, I'll go more in detail and people think I'm lying. Relationship strain. Unfortunately, relationships do take a bit of a hit with ADHD, often due to miscommunication, not purely on the ADHDer, but on one side to miscommunicate. Then we've got sensory sensitivities, easily overwhelmed by sight, sound, smell, touch. Rejection sensitivity is a big one for me. Thanks so much for that. I'm great at training people because details, but I burn people's heads out. You know what, Emma? Same here. That's why I do this job. So yeah, ADHD. We've talked about loads of characteristics, loads of potential ways of divvying it up. But you're right. It's confusing. It's overwhelming. So let's forget about it. Let's just combine it to ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Keep it simple. Why overcomplicate things? There are other terms that have been used in the past, such as attention deficit disorder, a reaction of childhood, meaning that it only existed in children. Minimal brain dysfunction, MBD. That one doesn't sound that great. These are outdated terms because the more we learn about ADHD, the more we learn that terms we used previously are just not helpful. So a good question is, if we were to revamp ADHD, what could be a new name for it? What is a more accurate name to describe what it is and what it isn't? Well, the DSM, as I mentioned, is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. This is our Bible that we're going to be following going forward. These two books, they are different. They do have their own nuances, but more or less they're aligned. And like I said, for ADHD, while they are similar enough, there are slight differences. So for like inattentive, you see how ADHD is split into different boxes. It's pretty cut and dry. Think of this more of as a spectrum where you don't have to be neatly in one box or right bang in the middle. You can be somewhere in between. All right, we've talked loads about a generic ADHD. Let's actually get into the real meat of today. ADHD is diagnosed in more males. Why? You tell me, why is it more likely to be diagnosed in males than women? Any theories, any categorical facts? The stats vary, but this particular one is showing that 5.4% prevalence rate compared to 2.3. That stat is changing a lot of the time. So if you're like, I've heard a difference, I wouldn't be surprised. Oh, Sonia says the patriarchy. Damn you, patriarchy. Yeah, that is to do with it. We've got more medical studies are based on males. Absolutely. Men don't need to socially conform and mask. Yep, that's true. More externalized symptoms are easy to identify. Women get diagnosed as personality disorder. You know what, Amanda? We are going to be looking into that as well. You're not wrong. Because it's a man's world, lack of research for women, girls tend to mask much more than boys. Less research for women are often stereotyped. More outwards expression, more disruption to others and to parents and teachers see more of it as pressed to sort out. Oh, Jade says higher masking and perfectionism in women, more likely to diagnose with anxiety and depression, symptoms and lack of awareness. Let's look into some of those reasons, again, from a biosocial model. So sex and gender, they are different. Females do have different chromosomes. They do have different reproduction organs, different hormones. They do have different responsibilities, attributes, and entitlements. I'm not saying they should have necessarily, but in the society we live in, males, again, different hormones, different genitalia. So why is ADHD different in men and women? We can't just look at gender and we can't just look at biological sex. We do have to take both into consideration to get a full picture on why there are differences. So here is a question. Regardless of the facts I show you, I just want to know your honest opinion. Are there differences in the brains between men and women with ADHD? Is it 100% social or is it 100% genetic? Is it 50-50? Is it somewhere in between? There are differences in the brain. This image, okay, let's look at this one. We got normal 14-year-old female, FIFA way. She has this like wave activities. I don't like the way they say normal, by the way. I didn't make this image. Then we've got ADD 14-year-old women with high theta wave activity. These images, they don't really tell you too much, but essentially what it's saying is there is different activity in the brain to a girl with ADHD and without ADHD and a boy with ADHD and a boy without ADHD. Sex differences in ADHD symptoms severity. Severity is an area we're going to keep coming back to. That's about like how much does it impact you on a day-to-day. And this is also a big reason why males potentially are more likely to gain support because the severity is higher. Or is the severity more noticeable? Who's to say how much it affects someone? Because we can't see inside someone's mind. So males show higher signs of ADHD. What do we mean higher signs? The signs that equal ADHD were correct from a male perspective anyway. So already we've got a little bit of old-fashioned bias here. There was a study done with over 2,000 twins, and essentially sex difference severity is due to genes. So in terms of how much ADHD impacts you is more related to your genetics rather than your sex. But different genders, there is different genetics, different genders, different people. So it is a little bit of both. There isn't a clear-cut answer, but it's not as straightforward as saying males were just completely misdiagnosed. There is still a difference. Oh, Jimmy says more criminal behavior in males. It's like you've seen my presentation already. Oh, men just get caught. I like that, Emma. Yeah, you're just better criminals, to be honest. This is another image that I made the other day, like literally last night. I like it a lot. So here, this is about explaining why ADHD is so different in not just males and females, but in people. Why is it that your ADHD is different to your friend's ADHD? Of course, we got the environmental factors to consider in terms of how we're brought up, our environment, our school, but it's pretty much known now that genetics plays a much bigger role than we've initially given it credit. So on here, let's say we've got genes. Our body is filled with ridiculous amounts of genes. To simplify it, gene 1, gene 2, gene 3, gene 4. If any of you now know what's the difference between genes and DNA and chromosomes, our body, we have a bunch of chromosomes, and those chromosomes within them have DNA. The DNA is our strands of information that makes up who we are. If you take a tiny section of that DNA, that's a gene. So a gene is just a segment of DNA. So here you can see we've got lots of different segments of DNA, all completely different. We put them together, and then eventually DNA is formed. Oversimplified, but you get it. So here, ADHD, these are all different individuals with different brains, and you can see how each color represents a different gene. So every single one of these brains has ADHD. Every single one of these brains, ADHD is different and it affects them differently. So you can see why it's so varied and why we can't find a cure or a reason, or because it's like, where do you begin? So let's look at some actual studies. We are going to be looking more into more nuance of ADHD. This is another little interesting graphic that was created. It essentially shows that in a simplistic way, ADHD is about on or off, yes or no. You either have order or you are chaotic. You either have high emotions or low emotions. You either act or you hesitate. It tends to be more extremes, but there are differences. That's what I want to spend a little bit more time focusing on. Here is a lovely flattering picture of Pillay, and him and Meyer in 2020 did an interesting study on internalizing comorbidities. Comorbidities is if you have one thing, you're likely to have another thing. Internalizing. So this is understanding the multiple things that make us who we are in primary school children with ADHD. And during the study, they found females with ADHD show more symptoms of anxiety than males. A lot of you already mentioned this, but we've got evidence. They found no sex differences for ADHD and anxiety symptoms, which is interesting and does contradict some other studies. Girls with ADHD had higher depression than boys. So we are seeing there is a much more emotional connection. Is this due to the hormones? Is it due to different genes? We've still got a lot more research to go. Quick question, just to get a feel of the room. Do you have ADHD? Yes or no? Statistically, we are looking at about 3 people in every 100 who may have ADHD. But of course, this number could be much higher because underreporting, misdiagnosis. This is a ballpark figure. Yeah. Oh, lots of you do have ADHD, which is nice to see, particularly because of today's subject matter. Hard to answer, not formally diagnosed. What is your sex? Let's do biological sex just because we're on about genetics today, or keep it nice and simple. Male or female? Okay. Nice, keep them coming in. Oh, just diagnosed at 60. Congratulations. Hopefully it makes your life feel so much easier. Both tools for anxiety and depression were formulated for men, so biased to misdiagnose women. You're right, Chris, on that. No males today. Blake, where are you? I know there are some males here, but we do often have more females than males attend these webinars. I'm curious to know the reason why, to be honest. And my hunch is because there is less information out there, people are more interested to find the answers that haven't previously been given. But you tell me. So here we've got male and females, those with ADHD and those without ADHD. So it's breaking it apart a bit more. So quick terminology, which will hopefully explain the next section, is behavior. But behavior has a slightly different meaning in psychology. So it means the measure of the observable responses made by a person, often reactionary. So if A happens, then B is the result. These responses can be measured as traits that are witnessed and form the basis of a diagnosis. So remember, a diagnosis isn't done by a neuroscience. You don't go in a brain scan of ADHD. It's all done via observations of our behavior. That has a lot of room for bias, manipulation, misdiagnosis, over-reporting, under-reporting. Do factors affect ADHD diagnosis differently in girls versus boys? This goes back to the behavior thing, like maybe the school you go to, maybe how women present. It's a fact. Yes, there are key differences in how we diagnose. There is internal bias. The system is broken. We are a long way from fixing it. Useful to keep in mind. A study done by Mulwell is they did a study on, do factors affect ADHD diagnosis differently in girls versus boys? Let's see if the research matches up with that. So we got emotions were a big factor in distinguishing ADHD diagnosed girls from high symptoms girls. It's saying even within the gender, depending on the emotional response, is going to play a big part on whether or not someone is diagnosed or is not diagnosed. We've got parents saw diagnosed boys more impaired than high symptom boys. So essentially what they're saying here is they thought boys needed more help. It was clear that they were struggling more. They had a bigger deficit, a bigger disorder, more arguably deserving of support. Interesting. Parents underrated girls' ADHD, yet overrated boys. So when we talk about misdiagnosis, probably the national average, about 3 in 100, is probably quite correct. When we break it to genders, it's going to be quite skewed. So if you think your daughter might have ADHD, really fight for it because this shows. All right, next question. When were you diagnosed? If you were diagnosed, was it around like 0 to 11? Was it 12 to 17 or 18 plus? I'm guessing a lot of you are late diagnosed. This is an interesting stat in terms of the average. So about 12 to 17 is the average time to get diagnosed. Again, if you look at here, the green being boys, the light blue or grey being females, more males are always diagnosed. There is a massive dip. Doesn't matter at what age group. So if you're younger, older, later age, women are always underdiagnosed. Who's more likely to face the following without ADHD treatment? And I think, Jamie, you mentioned this about the criminal activity. Let's put it to a test. So is there actually stats to back it up? If you are male and have untreated ADHD, that's the key thing. So no medication here. Are you more likely to have an alcohol abuse? If you're female, are you more likely to have a mood disorder? You tell me. Because we have this perception that males are more violent and dangerous and off the hinge and women are more emotional. But it's actually backed up by science and research. So let's have a look. So most people are saying males are more likely to have alcohol abuse. Women are more likely to have a mood disorder. But to be honest, the science does back it up. So males are more likely to have alcohol abuse. Women are more likely to be diagnosed with a mood disorder. Males are more likely to have drug abuse. Eating disorders are more common in females, crimes, prison sentences. This kind of backs up what we've been saying about how it presents itself for males more outwardly. It's not that ADHD affects someone worse than someone else. It just affects them differently. This is just the average. It's not saying 100%. Untreated ADHD in adults from this study by Rasmussen and Lavender essentially said the following. A Norwegian study analysed different ADHD that were never treated for ADHD before. They found abuse and criminal activity were more common in men. Affective eating and somatization disorders were more in women. But if you don't know what that word is, because I can't pronounce it properly, essentially it means everything that we don't know. So what about the things that we haven't even thought or come up with? It's like a extra category. Other than that, few sex differences were found. So there are sex differences. Don't get me wrong, these sex differences have big implications. They didn't say there was much more beyond this. But here you can see a breakdown of the different stats. Men are far more likely to get a slap on the wrist and told you probably shouldn't have done that in public. Or, as Emma said, maybe the women just aren't being caught. Who knows? Another part in the exact same study looked at where people with ADHD currently are in their life. Admittedly, the study wasn't huge, but still interesting. Ways of income and vocational activities for men and women. So what it's saying here is that men were more likely to be in work than women with ADHD. Women were more likely to have an education than men with ADHD. Rehabilitation, women are more likely to be able to rehabilitate. Women are more likely to be on sick pay. But interestingly, men are more likely to be on unemployment benefits. Less likely to actually have a job, where women will have a job, but may struggle to maintain it. We've also got women are more likely to have a disability pension, social security. This is an American study, but still, it's interesting how the differences align. I would say most of this is due to societal factors rather than a biological factor. Again, if you think I'm different, you tell me. It would be interesting to find out the true picture of alcoholism, drug use, self-medication in women, if there is a difference between diagnosed and undiagnosed. You're absolutely right. I can definitely have a look. I always look at PubMed or Google Scholar is a great place to find some really interesting studies. All right, we're going on a journey, everyone. So let's look at some biological development. What happens from when you're a tiny little egg all the way to an embryo, baby, to arguably a full-grown adult? So when I learned to talk at what age? We know there are differences. I hate to say it, women are smart. No, I will say girls are smarter than boys when we look at the national average. We do tend to balance out as we get older, but there are differences. So let's say you're in a class with both boys and girls. If the girls are slightly more developed, the boys are going to get more attention because they're the ones who are lacking. Thus, they'll get more support, get the diagnosis. When the genders balance out, the women are going to be at a disadvantage because they never received support. So you can see how our systems are skewed. This kind of makes the question, maybe gender-specific schools are the answer. Maybe having an all-girls school, an all-boys school is better. I honestly don't know about that. That's just a hunch. Then we got school practices. How are we actually taught in the classroom? So what set were you in? Were you in the bottom set? Were you in the top set? Were you somewhere in the middle? And what we'll tend to find is females tend to have been higher in top set, very intelligent. Remember how we talked at the very start of today's session about overperformance? Because you know there are areas you struggle in, you will double down and really focus, which eventually leads to burnout in later life, where males will be get in trouble, get more support, and then eventually be able to overperform later in life. Oh, we got Blake says, might be a dumb question as an American, but what does set mean? Oh, Blake. So set is, actually, someone tell me, is it like class? For instance, Bart Simpson is in the bottom set, where Lisa Simpson is the top set because so the work is harder. In the bottom set, work is easier. Arguably, you get more support. Yeah, grouping based on ability. Jimmy, that's a much nicer way of putting it. Much better articulated. Okay, nice. Here's a quote from Olsson, and they says, when pupils exhibit academic, emotional, or behavioral difficulties, teachers assess girls' impairments more severe than boys. Nevertheless, teachers are more likely to recommend treatment, counseling, or medication to boys. That is very interesting. What it is saying is maybe because the way the boys present it is more disruptive, they're more likely to get treatment. Where girls, while it is seen that they might arguably be struggling more because they are essentially quiet and submissive, they go amiss. Maybe I am reading into this wrong and this isn't the intended outcome, but I do think it's very interesting. Does that imply higher expectations of girls? I would say so. It does seem that way, doesn't it? We expect them to be able to perform higher, so maybe we have a higher level of expectation. Some of this stuff is quite controversial, but it's very interesting. All right, let's finish up today with some cultural influences. This is when we talk about the biosocial model. Essentially, if we aren't getting a full picture, we've also got to take society, our schools, our upbringing, where we learn things from our friends into consideration. So what activities did you like? Were you a sports person? Do you like music? Do you like reading? Did you like art? And you will find that typically females will gravitate to more expressive activities such as art or music, where males typically go towards sports. This will have an impact on how you develop, when people notice things, how you get picked up on. So very much a societal element. So yeah, a lot of like women are doing reading here. Again, with a pinch of salt, because our demographic is quite skewed today. It's definitely not 50-50. You will find that, again, the males will go for sports and the women will go for more solitary routes. I'm not saying that's the right way. I'm just saying that's what we're looking at. Oh, like a bit of a tomboy. Yeah, that's interesting as well. So tell me if you agree or disagree. ADHD has different neural origins in each sex. ADHD in male and women, they are different. Or female and males would benefit from different diagnosis and treatment. Should it be one diagnosis to rule them all? Or should we have different diagnosis for different genders? Or just different ways that it presents itself? So everyone is saying, yep, we should definitely have different ways of support, diagnosis and treatment for females to males. But we're a little bit mixed on whether or not there's different neurological origins. All right, one last study. I think I definitely gave way too much content in today, so never mind. Overdiagnosis and influence of client genders on diagnosis. So ADHD, 100% is overdiagnosed in males, but underdiagnosed in women. Boys and girls with potential ADHD get sent to 1,000 psychologists. Boys got diagnosed 2 times more. So both these boys and girls, over 1,000 of them, had very likely ADHD. But the boys were more likely to be diagnosed. Therapists don't adhere to diagnostic manuals. Interesting again, so they ultimately make their own decisions. Overdiagnosis of ADHD occurs to gender bias. We aren't talking about biological, we're talking about societal. Diagnostic training obviously can help to avoid it. Essentially, when we're looking at how people get diagnosed, it's like the Wild West. Kat says it's tricky though, as I have no doubts about my sexual identity, but I really benefited from sports and keeping my ADHD in check. It would be a shame if girls were not given those options. And that's true. I think obviously male, female, whatever, you do whatever you want to do. But because there is a kind of a leaning towards going one route than the other, something which might be a great outlet for those with ADHD may not get that opportunity. We've got different neurochemical differences in adults with ADHD. So it was shown that there are significant interactions between sex and age. Depending on your age, you'll notice different neurochemicals, which kind of aligns up with kind of the hormones and of male and females. So maybe we also need to look at a different diagnosis for age as well as gender. You can see how this can get a little bit out of hand. Where do we draw the line? Do we make a diagnosis that is designed just for you? Or do we do a wider one so the whole of society knows exactly how to support you, or at least as a starting point? As always like to end on this. If any of you resonate with having ADHD and in the UK, regardless of gender, age, anything, there is support available and you can get support in the workplace. And that's essentially what Exceptional Individuals does most days. Do get in contact. Again, this is available to anyone in employment and anyone who resonates with ADHD. You do not have to be diagnosed. If you thought today was interesting, I would love to learn more. So our next webinar is on the psychology of ADHD. Next week, we are purely looking at one angle of ADHD, how it affects people psychologically. We've also got our YouTube channel, so do check this out. Just go to Exceptional Individuals on YouTube. You can see all our lovely videos. We've got some really good ones here. Let's have a little ganders on ADHD. And you'll see that we've got the science of ADHD. We've got the future of ADHD medication, ADHD in the workplace. we've got some really exciting ones. We also got another one that looks at ADHD and sex difference, but this was done a year ago, and since then lots of research has happened, hence why we did a more updated one today. Here's our contact information. So if you thought, that's cool, want to learn more, exceptionalindividuals.com, check it out, and drop us an email at admin@accept.co.uk or at exceptionalindividuals.com. If you want to email me directly, it's nat@exceptionalindividuals.com. I'll be more than happy to speak or answer any follow-up questions. Thank you so much for attending. I hope you found it interesting and enlightening. It was really great to get back into the science stuff that I finished my master's or have much more time to dedicate towards this. So hopefully you'll see even bigger jump in quality going forward.